Where is the data you intercept? What have you done with those information tapes?
This is the real voice of the man who played Darth Vader.
This ship carries the crest of Alderaan. Was there any of the royal family on board?
While this is the voice that made it into the movies.
Where are those transmissions you intercepted? What have you done with those plans?
Choosing the voice not only caused an ongoing conflict.
Star Wars has been a big struggle.
I didn't even take credit for the voice.
I got ostracized from the movie.
But resulted in unusual math. 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 equals 1? How can 4 people make up one character? Who was officially credited for playing him?
No matter what I said, George wouldn't believe me.
And why the bad blood between actor and franchise?
When was the last time you spoke to George Lucas?
Oh, God.
Well, it starts with this man, David Prowse.
Frank, I think this young man needs some help.
When George Lucas came to cast Darth Vader, he wanted somebody with a major, imposing physical presence. He wanted a big man, who could fill out that very scary black silhouette that Darth Vader has.
As both an actor and a 6'6" bodybuilder, Prowse was more than qualified.
I got a phone call from George Lucas, who I'd never heard of. He comes on the phone and he said, my name's George Lucas, and he said, I'd like to talk to you about a film I'm doing. I said, excuse me, asking. I said, I've never heard of you. But at that time, he was totally unknown. Like, nobody had ever heard of George Lucas, you see.
By this time, Lucas had only directed 2 films.
And he said, I'm doing this film called Star Wars, and I'd like to offer you the role of the big villain of the film. And I said, well, thank you very much. I said, how did you know of me? He said, I saw you in Clockwork Orange. He said, if you're good enough for Stanley Kubrick, you're good enough for me.
But Darth Vader wasn't the only part he was presented with.
George said, I've got 2 parts I'd like you to consider. The first part's a part of a character called Chewbacca. I said, what the hell is Chewbacca? And he said, it was like a furry type gorilla that goes through the film on the side of the goodies. And I turned my nose up. I thought, well, I don't fancy 3 months in a gorilla skin. I said, what's the other one? And he said, well, the other one's the big villain of the film. I said, say no more, George, I'll take it.
He said, well, I think you made a very wise decision. He said, because nobody will ever forget Darth Vader.
He looked like a superhero because he had that physique. And that physique brought him into this film.
While there was never any doubt about Prowse's ability to don the suit,
the plasterers actually took a mold from Dave Prowse, and that's what I actually worked upon to actually create Vader.
There was a problem he didn't see coming.
Action! Where is the data you intercept?
Prowse's voice,
What have you done with those information tapes?
was unique.
He had a very Northern England accent, which is almost Cockney.
Where are those tapes?
It's just, very, very thick and ridiculous for a movie.
We called him Darth Farmer. He's like, and now, princess, we'll talk about the location of the rebel bases.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
Actually, I performed all the way through the picture.
During filming, as far as Prowse and everyone else was aware, he was the only one who was to play and voice Darth Vader. But there was an issue on set.
I kept on saying to George, what are we going to do about the voice? Because everything I'm saying is coming through the mask and is obviously no good for reproduction purposes. He used to say, well, don't worry, we'll go into the studios and re-record all your lines at the end of the shoot. Mm-hmm. So I automatically assumed that it was me that was going to go into the studios and re-record all the lines.
What happened was they got to the end of the movie, chased back to America immediately, because the films were all shot in England. And when they were in America, they suddenly realized that I hadn't done the overdubbing, you see. And then, of course, it was too expensive to get me to fly out to Hollywood, just an hour's work, as it were.
This is Prowse's side of the story. But according to the film's producer, Prowse actually knew all along.
We told Dave at the time, during shooting, that his voice would not be used, that we needed an electronic voice. We needed a processed voice, one that sounded like it came through the respirator and was electronically filtered.
I think they just made the decision and they wanted Darth to have an American voice. And I think it was obviously a lot more convenient to get a major voiceover artist to do the Darth Vader voice.
You were a little disappointed by that.
The thing was, she says, I didn't know anything about it.
When I saw the movie and this strange voice came out, and
Your power's a weak old man.
and everybody's coming up to me after the movie. When did they do the voice, Dave? When did you do the voice? And I said, no, it wasn't me.
So, who was it? When it came time to find a voice for Darth Vader, Lucas realized how crucial a decision it was as it would essentially make or break the character. He initially considered Orson Welles, but feared that his voice,
The court of law could not help but bow down to public opinion,
would be too recognizable, causing audiences to be taken out of the movie.
When Lucas put the film together, he realized he wanted a darker voice or a bass voice.
He would find exactly that in James Earl Jones, whose voice you may also recognize as Mufasa.
Look, Simba, everything the light touches is our kingdom.
But in the 70s, Jones was an unknown actor. And based on his background, it's a kind of miracle that Lucas cast him.
So he picks a kid that comes from Mississippi who stutters and raised in Michigan.
Jones's stutter growing up was so severe that it left him effectively mute for most of his childhood.
Kids are very pure in a way. One way or the other, either you talk or you don't talk. And if it's that painful and that embarrassing to talk, zip. And I just gave it up.
That was until one man changed his life.
There was a teacher who looked at one of your poems and said, "This is so good, I want you to prove that you wrote this."
He discovered that I not only loved poetry, I wrote poetry privately, secretly. And he challenged me one day. He said, this poem is so good, I think you didn't write it. I think you plagiarized it. So to prove you wrote it, get up in front of the class and recite it to us by heart. And of course I did, and I didn't stutter. He says, aha, now we have a way to recover this power of speech.
The boy who had no voice was now chosen to be the voice behind one of the most iconic characters in the history of cinema. But Jones's success in the recording sessions was far from guaranteed, since casting him actually went against Lucas's formula.
What I would do is I would take the various contenders for the various roles and I'd mix them around and have them work ensemble. Because what I was trying to do is see how they all look together and work together as a group, not as individuals.
Jones had to individually record all of Vader's dialogue without ever forming chemistry with the cast and without ever seeing the full cut of the film. So he put in his best possible effort, which was exactly what Lucas didn't want.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Lucas instructed Jones to keep his performance flat and restrained, with very little inflection, essentially saying, try less. Definitely not less than the effort of hitting that subscribe button, but it was hardly labor-intensive.
The job took 2.5 hours. They paid me all of $9,000. Which was not bad for 2.5 hours of work. I was broke, and for me, that was good money.
If he knew that his work that day would become one of the cornerstones of a $46 billion movie franchise, he may have thought differently, but he never complained.
None of us knew what we had, and that was fine.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take it away!
Jones's voice was a hit, and during recordings for the sequel, he wanted to give even more to the voice. But again, Lucas pushed back.
We spent a whole day trying to figure out what we did right. And Lucas finally figured out, don't be too expressive. I was trying to improve on, improve my performance. He said, no, it's all about a narrow band of expression. If you get too expressive, he seems too human.
Lucas was right to avoid a more human voice. The biggest proof?
Start tearing this ship apart piece by piece until you find those tapes.
Everyone agreed Jones's was the better voice, except for Prowse.
I think he did a wonderful job, but I still think I could have done equally as well, given the right opportunity.
But that wasn't the main reason he felt resentful about being replaced.
The film came out and we got all this publicity coming over saying what a fantastic movie it was. And almost the first thing that happened for me was I got a cable from a very famous American film director and it says, congratulations, Dave, you're in the biggest movie of all time. By the way, did you know they've overdubbed your voice? And that was the very first I've heard. And nobody from Lucasfilm has ever come up to me and said why they overdubbed my voice.
While Prowse's bitterness, which would soon escalate, stemmed from him wanting more credit, Jones ironically felt the exact opposite.
I was just acting as special effects. That's all that was. And at the same time, I was having done the Great White Hope film. I'd become a member of the board of directors of the Oscar board. When the controversy over whether Mercedes McCambridge deserved credit for contributions to Linda Blair's voice, the devil coming
in The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Keep away! The soul is mine!
Yeah, and I thought there was a silly argument. Then I said to myself that all the Mercedes is special effects. And I wanted to keep that clear in my case, so I didn't even take credit for the voice of Darth Vader.
For 6 years, the man who voiced Darth Vader didn't have a name. It wasn't until the third film that Jones agreed to be credited, feeling that his performance had finally earned recognition.
You ever go back to him and say, hey, we need to revisit that salary?
No. I had to find the grace in me to say, accept that. That's what I was worth.
You have to admire Jones's humility in giving himself less credit.
I was special effects.
But for Star Wars fans, when you think of who played Darth Vader, what name comes to mind? Probably James Earl Jones. Whereas for Prowse, the more deserving he felt of the credit, the more it eluded him, and the more problems he ran into.
Yeah, it was me trying to tell the truth. It's about things which happened which shouldn't have happened. And unfortunately, Lucasfilm seemed to have taken objection to it. And unfortunately, it's gone on for years and years and years.
During a 1978 interview, Prowse spoiled one of the biggest plot twists in all of cinema.
No, I am your father.
So why would he intentionally do that? Well, he didn't.
I didn't know I was Luke Skywalker's father until I went to the cinema and saw it in the movie.
During filming, Lucas, Kirshner, and Mark Hamill were the only ones who knew the true dialogue.
David Prowse was given different dialogue in that scene.
To keep the secret, the script said, Obi-Wan killed your father, instead of, no, I am your father.
My understanding equally is that David Prowse discovered that Darth Vader was Luke's father when he actually saw the finished film.
So if Prowse genuinely didn't know, how was he able to spoil it? It turns out that during the interview, he was just joking around and made an incredibly lucky, or unlucky, guess. But his spoiler run wouldn't end there. Shortly before the release of Return of the Jedi, Prowse was accused of giving away Vader's death to a Daily Mail journalist, which didn't sit well with Lucas.
I was immediately told to report to George Lucas's office, and I was confronted by George, who had that morning's copy of the Daily Mail in his hands. There on page 3, in bold headlines, it states, Darth Vader to be killed off in the next Star Wars movie, in an exclusive interview with Dave Prowse.
This turned out to just be sloppy journalism. During the interview, the journalist told Prowse about the film's ending, not the other way around.
No matter what I said, George wouldn't believe me.
We actually went to Daily Mail and talked to the reporter, and we asked him is it true that Dave Prowse gave you all this information? And it was surprising for us because he said, no, he never told us anything. It was some members from the crew.
And it would get worse for Prowse. After years of having no voice or face attributable to the character, he performed the scene in which Darth Vader is unmasked at the end of Return of the Jedi. But Lucas had other plans, reshooting the scene with Sebastian Shaw without Prowse knowing, and their feud would eventually reach a breaking point.
And now, I'm gonna school kid on just how cool George Luke is.
When Prowse appeared in a documentary to vent his grievances,
Return of the Jedi was the beginning of merchandising, and then the whole thing became super commercial from then onwards.
Lucasfilm decided they finally had enough and formally banned him from all official Star Wars events.
When was the last time you spoke to George Lucas?
Oh gosh, well, it would have been at the end of Jedi.
Wow.
That would have been the last time I spoke
The early
to him.
80s.
Yeah. Just had way for me to end, and to this day, I'm still suffering from the wrath of Lucas over whatever was happening on Episode 3. I'm totally been ignored by Lucasfilm. They ignore me completely.
Prowse would pass away on November 28, 2020, at 85 years old, and he never got to repair his relationship with the studio.
Would you have played Darth Vader knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I'm terribly, terribly sorry that my relationship with Lucasfilm got so soured.
While Prowse endured a very loud and public controversy, another man who played Darth Vader went basically unrecognized. That man was Bob Anderson, who performed Vader's lightsaber duels. They were originally intended for Prowse, but when it came time to perform the choreographed fights, he had trouble remembering the moves. So Anderson, who was the choreographer, stepped in.
All of the fights that I did on film, and indeed as a modern fencer and as a coach, I stored a lot of experiences and sword work away in my mind, so something would happen and it would then click in the position, think, oh yes, I remember that.
But there was a problem when Anderson donned the suit. He was 6'1", which was several inches shy of Prowse's 6'6" frame. To solve this, the duels were filmed from low angles, and Anderson wore platform shoes to boost his height. Anderson's involvement was kept entirely secret in order to protect the myth that Vader was played by just a single person. But one cast member had reservations about that decision. In an interview, Hamill revealed that Bob Anderson was the man who actually did Vader's fighting, and that he told Lucas he didn't think it was fair to withhold credit, as Anderson worked so hard and deserved some recognition. In addition to Darth Vader's physicality and the timbre of his voice, there's one more element, played by yet another man, that makes him complete.
Did you do the heavy breathing?
No, I think George did that. George saved that for himself, I'm sure.
The breathing was done by neither Lucas nor Jones. It was actually performed by the sound designer.
The concept of the sound of Darth Vader came about from the first film, and the script described him as some kind of a strange dark being who was in some kind of life support system, that he was breathing strange, that maybe you heard sounds of mechanics or motors. He might be part robot, he might be part human, we really didn't know. And so the original concept I had of Darth Vader was a very noise-producing individual who came into the scene breathing like some pleasing windmill. You could hear his heart beating. You move his head, you heard motors turning. It was almost like some kind of a robot in some sense. And he made so much noise that we had to sort of cut back on that concept. The first experimental mixes we did in Star Wars, he sounded like an operating room, like an emergency room, moving around.
To nail the sound, Bert had to think outside of the box.
I went to a place where they sell underwater equipment, scuba equipment, and I recorded the breathing in an old oxygen, and a scuba mask. I put the microphone down inside it, so it's very close perspective, and recorded me breathing, and then we edit that to fit the rhythm of the speaking in the film.
Most impressive.
Beyond the breathing, the voice, and the imposing physicality of Darth Vader, the most recognizable element is his look.
When people first saw Darth Vader, they didn't know what he was. Is he a monster? Is there a guy in there? Is it a robot? They didn't know who he was. He was just the villain. And he was such an iconic villain. At the time, I didn't have any idea that any of this would work or that it would have the impact that it did. You just don't think that way.
Originally, Darth Vader wasn't supposed to be permanently wearing the iconic black helmet and suit. In the opening scene of A New Hope, we first meet Vader after he crosses between two ships in outer space. But there was a problem with this. There's no air in space, which was pointed out by the film's concept artist.
George came and we talked about Darth Vader, and I started sketching breathing mask, and I came up with one that looked sort of evil. It had a sort of wolf-like turned down nose, and I put some slots in this breathing opening that would look sort of like teeth.
Lucas wanted Vader to have a samurai-style helmet that also functioned as a piece of breathing equipment. The costume designer helped visualize this by staging an impromptu fashion show with different pieces of clothing thrown together, including a black motorcycle suit, a gas mask, a Nazi helmet, and a monk's cloak.
These were just sketches that were the best we could do in terms of how we felt it should look, but not necessarily the end product in the sense that this was really going to be it. But it sort of turned out to be it in the end, for the most part.
Lucas immediately latched onto the design, and it became an inseparable part of Vader's character. And as much as the look will endure forever, the same can't be guaranteed about the voice.
I have been every voice you have ever heard inside your head.
That was from The Rise of Skywalker, which features James Earl Jones's last recording as Darth Vader. He was 88 at the time. Understandably, he wanted to step down, but Lucasfilm wanted to keep his voice, and Jones was offered a unique solution.
James Earl Jones steps back from voicing Darth Vader, signs off on using archived recordings to recreate voice with AI.
He signed off on allowing a Ukraine-based company, it's called Respeecher, to manufacture that deep,
Darth Vader sound, and apparently the AI company works very closely with Jones and his team.
While many rightfully oppose the use of AI in cinema, does that opinion change when it's used to preserve the voice of a character that we grew up with? Or is a voice something that should never outlive its owner?
James Earl Jones, the legendary actor of the stage and screen, has died at the age of 93.
He was defined by his booming voice, the voice of Darth Vader in the Star Wars franchise.
Public opinion was, and still is, split on Jones's decision. Some people see it as a way to continue his legacy, while others view it as an ethical slippery slope. And other actors have voiced Darth Vader in video games, not in films, but take a listen.
You will know the power of the dark side. Such hatred. You would have made an excellent Inquisitor.
Regardless of your opinion, and please let me know yours in the comments, there'd be no discussion at all if it wasn't for the colossal impact of Darth Vader.
I can't think of any other film that there's ever been where the villain of the film has become such a popular figure.
And the incredible team effort behind him. 1 creator, 4 actors, 1 sound designer, 2 artists, 1 legendary villain. I'm Adam, this is ScreenPuff. If you liked this, check out this next video. And as always, thank you for watching.